There are moments in history that begin completely normally, and then, without warning, they do not. Calm water, quiet radar, routine patrols. Just another night shift for the most powerful naval force on Earth. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, until everything changes in the space of a few seconds. The decisions that caused it had already been made, not loudly, not publicly, but quietly, deliberately, with cold precision. And once those decisions were set into motion, there was absolutely no going back. What you are about to hear is not a story about a single explosion. It is a story about what happens when the world's greatest naval force gets pushed to the edge of its limits and starts to slip. Stay with me, because this one builds. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. We cover the stories that go deeper than the headlines, the ones that show you what is actually happening beneath the surface of global events. You do not want to miss a single update. Now let us get into it. Near the coastline, deep inside hardened air bases and concealed hangars, aircraft were being prepared. Not the standard patrol configurations. These jets were armed differently, loaded with a weapon built for a very specific purpose. The YJ-91 missile. Now here is what makes that detail so important. This is not just any anti-ship weapon. It moves at speeds approaching Mach 3 or beyond. And it was not designed simply to strike targets. It was designed to hunt radar systems first, to blind a fleet before destroying it. That distinction matters enormously, because what was being set in motion was not a conventional attack. It was a plan to strip away the eyes and ears of an entire carrier group before it even had the chance to fully react. Out at sea, the USS Nimitz carrier group was operating exactly as it always does. Layered defense systems, advanced radar coverage, constant surveillance across every angle. On paper, and in reality, one of the most heavily protected military formations ever assembled on this planet. Routine, controlled, untouchable, until the first signal came in. At first, the data did not make sense. Multiple fast-moving contacts, low altitude, extremely high speed. The radar operator read the screen, paused, then said it again, slower this time. We have got incoming. And just like that, the comm was gone. Because this was not one or two targets. It was dozens, then more. Then a number that was genuinely difficult to count clearly. What was appearing on those screens was not a normal attack signature. It was coordinated, layered, engineered specifically to overwhelm. Within minutes, alarms were sounding across the entire carrier group. Pilots moved fast toward their aircraft. Command decks flooded with activity. Defensive systems surged to full operational capacity. And then someone said the one thing that nobody in that situation ever wants to hear. These are anti-radiation signatures. That was the moment the true picture clicked into place. This was not simply about striking ships. This was about destroying the very systems those ships used to defend themselves. Anti-radiation missiles do not aim randomly. They lock onto radar emissions. They follow the signal back to its source, which means the more aggressively you try to see the threat coming, the more precisely you expose yourself to it. Think about that for just a second. The system built to protect you becomes the system that gets targeted first. The opening wave arrived fast. Too fast. Defensive systems responded immediately. Interceptors launched, close-in weapons activated, crews at full readiness. But something felt wrong almost instantly. The missiles were not coming from a single direction. They were coming from everywhere. Some skimming low across the surface of the water, barely registering until they were dangerously close. Others climbing high before diving sharply downward. Multiple attack angles, multiple altitudes, all timed to arrive together. And then, impact. A destroyer on the outer edge of the formation absorbed the first hit. Not catastrophic on its own, but enough to knock out critical radar systems. And the moment that radar went dark, that ship became exposed. Which was exactly the point. Because the second wave was already on its way. On the carrier deck of the USS Nimitz, organized operations began shifting into something harder to describe. Not full chaos, but controlled urgency pushing right against its own limits. Jets being repositioned. Commands relayed across overlapping voices. Systems recalibrated in real time. But the problem was no longer just the incoming attack. It was the fog beginning to settle. Because once radar coverage starts going dark, you stop seeing the battlefield clearly. You start reacting, guessing, hoping your next decision is the right one. Another officer's voice cut through the noise. We are losing tracking. We cannot lock them all. If this is already gripping you, hit like right now. That one tap tells the YouTube algorithm to push this video to more people who need to see it. It costs you nothing. It means everything for keeping this kind of content reaching a wider audience. Now stay with me, because it is about to get heavier. That was the moment understanding began to spread across the deck. This attack was never designed to be stopped completely. It was designed to overload, to break coordination, to force mistakes, to stretch the best defense on Earth until gaps appeared. Some interceptors found their marks, brief flashes of light across the sky marking successful hits. But many did not, because when you are facing sheer volume, even the most advanced defense system on the planet begins to thin. And when a defense thins, gaps open. A small gap, but enough. A cluster of missiles slipped through the outer defensive ring, closer, adjusting, correcting course, and the focus of every person on that carrier shifted to one point, the USS Nimitz itself. You could feel the weight of it even before the words were spoken, because everyone on that deck understood what it meant if that ship was compromised, even partially. It would not just be damage. It would be a message, a global one, broadcast to every government, every military command, every strategic planner watching from a distance. One officer stood still for just a second, eyes fixed on the incoming tracks on the display screen, then said it quietly, "They are going for us." For a brief moment after those words landed, everything felt like it slowed down, not because time actually changed, but because everyone on that deck understood precisely what it meant. On the command deck, voices overlapped, but they were not panicked. They were sharp, controlled, operating at the speed that genuine crisis demands. Reroute all defensive tracking to priority sectors. Get those aircraft off the deck now. Close in systems to full auto. Do not wait for confirmation. And then something happened that illustrated the impossible position they were in. Some radar systems went deliberately silent, because that is the trade-off that anti-radiation threats force upon you. Keep your radar active, and you paint a target on yourself. Shut it down, and you lose visibility. Both choices leave you exposed. There is no clean option, only the least damaging one available in that specific second. So now decisions were no longer purely tactical. They were instinctive, immediate, made with incomplete information under maximum pressure. Around the edges of the carrier group, smaller ships began repositioning, trying to build overlapping defensive coverage without fully depending on radar systems that were already compromised. It was not perfect, but it bought seconds. And right then, seconds were the most valuable thing in the world. The sky above the waterline lit up again, interceptors chasing signals, distant detonations marking partial successes. But there were still too many incoming contacts. Always too many. One officer leaned over a console, eyes moving across partial tracking data that was no longer giving a complete picture. How many got through? Nobody answered immediately, because nobody had a clear number. And in that environment, uncertainty is its own kind of damage, sometimes worse than a confirmed hit. The missiles that had slipped through were not behaving randomly. They were adjusting, correcting, locking in with a precision that told you everything you needed to know about how much planning had gone into this moment. This was not luck. This was execution. The first impact on the Nimitz itself was not what anyone had expected. It did not strike the most visible or obvious point. It hit near the edge, targeting support systems rather than the main structure. And that told you everything about the intent behind it. This was not about one dramatic, decisive blow. This was about weakening piece by piece, degrading capability layer by layer, stretching the response until the gaps became permanent. The deck shook, not violently, but enough. Equipment rattled. A section of operations lost power for a brief moment before backup systems engaged. Damage report? Minor structural impact. Systems fluctuating. We are still operational. Still operational. Two words that carried enormous weight, because they meant the line had not been crossed yet. But it was getting close, and everyone on that deck knew it. Share this video right now. If you know someone who wants to understand how modern naval warfare actually works, the tactics, the psychology, the pressure, send this to them directly. Every share puts this analysis in front of someone who deserves to see it. It takes 5 seconds, and it genuinely helps us reach further. Do it now, and then keep watching, because we are not done yet. The pace slowed, not because the threat had passed, because the first phase had achieved what it was designed to achieve. Systems had been tested, limits had been revealed, gaps had been mapped. Now came something different. The second phase did not arrive with the same overwhelming volume as the first. It came in smaller clusters, quieter, more deliberate, harder to detect precisely because it was not trying to flood the defenses. It was trying to find the specific weaknesses the first wave had exposed. And by now, the defenses were no longer at full strength. Some systems had already been pushed beyond their designed operational limits. Others were running on backup protocols. Some were simply offline. A technician's voice carried frustration through the noise on the deck. We are cycling systems too fast. We are burning them out. But there was no alternative. You keep them running or you lose your edge entirely. Those were the only two options. The incoming signals adjusted again. Slightly different approach angles, slightly different speeds. Probing, testing, looking for whatever the first wave had opened up, and eventually, they found it. The next impact was sharper, more focused. A key section of the carrier's operational systems took the hit, not enough to disable it completely, but enough to shift the balance in a way that felt different from everything before it. Lights dimmed, systems lagged. For a moment, just a moment, the flow of coordination across the carrier slowed. And that moment mattered, because in environments operating at this level of pressure, even a few seconds of hesitation ripples outward in ways that compound quickly. Reroute. Reroute now. Trying. We have got delays. Systems are not syncing. That is when you begin to see it clearly. Not collapse. Not panic. But strain. Real, visible, accumulating strain. The kind that does not break everything at once, but makes every single thing harder. Across the carrier group, other ships were feeling it too. Not all affected equally. Some holding better than others. But none of them untouched. And more critically, none of them operating with a complete picture anymore. Because once coordination begins to fragment, even strong positions start feeling uncertain. On the carrier deck, operations had slowed but not stopped. Aircraft movement was more cautious. Commands were repeated more often just to make sure they were heard and understood correctly. People were relying less on systems and more on each other, moving with more deliberation, less automation. Because every action now carried more weight than it did an hour ago. Far from the immediate scene, in Washington, updates were arriving in fragments. Degraded operational capability. Partial system disruption. Carrier group still active, but under sustained pressure. Those words do not sound catastrophic in isolation, but in military language, they carry specific meaning. They describe a situation where the line has not been crossed, but is being approached. Carefully, gradually. And that is precisely what makes it dangerous. Because gradual pressure makes decisions harder. Do you escalate? Do you hold position? Do you respond immediately or wait for a clearer picture? And while you are deciding, the situation keeps moving. Back in the region, the tempo slowed again. Not because the threat had ended, but because the objective of this phase had been met. Pressure applied. Systems tested. Limits found. Gaps confirmed. Now came the element that does not appear on any radar screen. The psychological shift. One officer standing near the edge of the deck looked out across the water, quiet again, at least on the surface, then said something that stayed with every person who heard it. They are not just hitting us. He paused for a second. They are shaping how we react. And that is when the full picture finally comes into focus. This was never purely about firepower. It was about control. Not physical control of territory or water. Control of tempo. Control of decisions. Control of what happens next. And right now, for the first time in a very long time, that control was no longer one-sided. Moments like this are rarely defined by the explosions themselves. They are defined by the pause in between. That short, heavy silence where everyone is waiting to see what comes next, and deep down already knows that whatever it is, nothing is going to look quite the same afterward. The USS Nimitz was still operational. The carrier group was still in the water, but something had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to be felt by everyone present. Enough to be noticed by everyone watching from a distance. The world's most powerful naval force had been pushed, tested, stretched, and the people who designed the attack had learned exactly what they needed to learn. That is the part that matters most. Not the damage count, not the system failures, but the knowledge now held by the other side about where the limits are and how to approach them again. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Here is the question I want you to sit with. If the goal of this kind of attack is not to destroy but to study, to map limits, to shape reactions, to control tempo, what does that tell you about what comes next? And at what point does sustained pressure like this force a decision that goes far beyond the battlefield itself? Let me know what you think. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of stories like this one. Like the video if it kept you locked in all the way to the end. Share it with someone who needs to understand how modern conflict actually operates beneath the surface. Click the next video on your screen. I will see you there.